In the first reading, we hear of a fascinating sort of event, I think, in the very beginning of the church, the very early church. And what we have there is people coming forward to the apostles and saying, hey, look, the widows are being neglected, right? They're not being taken care of in the way that they're supposed to be. And Jesus mentioned that, right? Several places, it's the importance of taking care of the widows. And so the apostles say something very fascinating. They say, you know what, you're right. We're not able to do that. That's not getting done in a satisfactory manner. And that's an important thing. Jesus said it. So we need to do something differently. And so they ordain 7 men for the first class of deacons in the church. And they begin helping more with the day-to-day taking care of the widows, while the apostles begin to oversee the church in other ways, ministry and offering the sacraments and so forth. This struck me in a really profound way this week in particular, and it's one of those, a million different times where the gospel or the scriptures impact you when you're reading them. But a really fascinating, so just a little story from this week. On Monday, I hadn't read the gospel yet. I hadn't read the readings for the weekend. On Monday, I visited all of our sick and shut-ins and widows and widowers. And that's a kind of an all-day thing. Where they're all over. The people that can't get to Mass are all over Putnam County. And so bringing communion to them is sort of an all-day affair. I have it in my calendar once a month to do that. We have so many wonderful parishioners who do that every week and break up the list and so forth. But I think it's really important as a pastor to get out and see the people that are not able to make it. But the other really then tie-in is that the last 2 months before Monday, I had to cancel. I had to not go out and visit all of our sick and shut-ins because things had come up that literally also had to be dealt with, And so there I was reading the gospel then, or reading the readings for this weekend on Tuesday or Wednesday, and just really kind of being struck right between the eyes, as it happens so many times. Boy, I wonder who else was neglecting the widows and widowers. It was a good thing. It was a good challenge to me. But this brings up something that I want to talk about, and before I do it, I just want to caution, nothing's changing. This is not some sort of big announcement, okay? But over the past year or so, there has been several times where I've been really close to going to the Archdiocese and saying, I cannot do 2 parishes in a university anymore. I still am. Okay, still am. So just let that sink in. Nothing's changing. But I got close to that. And I've had good priest friends and a great spiritual director who's helped me with that a lot and understand how to do that. But just in the Archdiocese itself, I have several friends and people priests that I've known going through the seminary a couple years ahead, a couple years behind, whatever it might be. But you obviously, as priests in the Archdiocese, we all know each other. There's one priest friend who was given 5 parishes and had kind of a breakdown, had to get psychiatric and psychological help. He reached a point where he just kind of broke, and he's still a priest today and doing really well. Doesn't have 5 parishes anymore. There's another priest that I know of that's a priest friend who has 3 parishes and had some sort of heart attack type of thing on Holy Thursday this year. Mass ended because he had to go to the hospital and is getting treated for various health things and so forth. I also have 3 other friends who, when given 2 parishes, one was given 4, these 3 priest friends of mine who've left ministry. 2 of them were given 2 parishes, each of them were given 2 parishes, and within a year of being given 2 parishes, left the priesthood. One did that after having 4 parishes for a while. Now, let me say, there's a lot of things to say about all of that, right? And I want to dive into that. And first of all, the first thing I want to say is, I recognize that my brother that has 4 children under the age of 6 has it way harder, okay? This is like being in Tahiti, compared to what my brother and his wife and parents, etc., right? This is not anything along those lines. But what I want to do is step back a little bit and first of all look at kind of the 30,000-foot view of the Archdiocese in general, because I serve on the priest council and so forth, and there's a lot of discussions that have been going on for many years amongst priests and other people, right? Lay people, monks, brothers, nuns, talking about what are we doing? How are we looking at this? And it's very similar to the first reading. Here's the problem, right? We have things that are not being done, and I think that's the hard part about it. The hard part about having 2 parishes or 3 or 4 or 5 or multiple ministries is that you literally, it's not the work, right? This is not hitting railroad ties for 8 hours a day or welding or anything along those lines. It's not the work. It's literally seeing in the eyes of people like, we really need you doing this and you can't. I'd love to go to, I think being present to our young people is really important, right? They're in that age where they're getting so assaulted. So I love to be present at games or whatever it is, but I have 7 public high schools. 7. One of them is in Terre Haute. Terre Haute North is in my parish boundaries, and so is North Putt, and South Putt, and Cloverdale, and Greencastle, and Northview, and Cloverdale, and Clay City, right? So it's the disappointment. It's our young people over at DePauw. There are 600 registered Catholics on campus, and we see about 10%. And that's a normal stat. 90% of college students stop practicing their faith. And I hear from them all the time, right? The ones that are here, they're like, man, we're here. The church is like attacked in our classes. Not all of them, but the vast majority. The Catholic Church is portrayed as the devil. And I got like 5 hours to go help them a week, versus all of this that they're facing and all of these things that they're hearing, right? That's the hard part. And that's what you hear coming up in the first reading. There's a lot of good stuff that needs to be done, and it's not getting done. How do we deal with that? And so again, looking at the 30,000-foot view, the view that I have to sometimes look at, I did a little study, I did a blog post that a lot of priests and people have been chatting about or talking about. I know priests in other dioceses, looking at within 7 miles of Monument Circle in Indianapolis, there are 108 masses on the weekend. 108 masses within 7 miles of Monument Circle. And there are approximately 44,000 open seats at those masses. There are more open seats than there are filled seats at the 108 masses. The rough numbers, and again, it's not all numbers, but just from a numbers perspective, you could get rid of 70 masses and still have a seat for everyone within 7 miles of Monument Circle. Again, looking at Terre Haute City as an example, there are currently 15 masses being said for the number of people that could fit into St. Patrick's in 4 masses on the weekend. Now, again, if you have friends or you're from Terre Haute, I'm not saying we should do that. There's more to it than numbers. I get that. Right? But just from the numbers are shocking. Right? And so, again, we're at this moment, I think, like the first reading. What are we doing? How are we going to address these issues? Canon law says that a priest can only say 3 masses on a Sunday. And the Bishop of Evansville has actually come out and said that his priests are only celebrating 3 masses on Saturday night through Sunday. That's it. And so these things are being talked about. Canon law, you could do it, and that's the way that I get 5, is by, it says on a weekday you can do 2 masses, and on Sunday you can do 3. So my 2 weekday masses on Saturday night count as my 2 for Saturday. My 3 that I celebrate on Sunday count as my 3. But there are times where if I have a wedding or a funeral on a Saturday, I have to call the bishop or cardinal or whoever it is and say, hey, can I violate canon law and have a 3rd mass on Saturday? And I kind of rationalize it by, well, it's on him. If he says yes, that's And they always say yes. So we'll see what God has to say. And again, it's different. I understand it's totally different, but here's the thing. There was one time, I remember my grandmother telling me about a priest one time that forgot the words of consecration at Mass. I was like, how do you do that? You know? Then about a year ago, I was celebrating the 9th Mass in 4 days, because it was one of those where Immaculate Conception fell on like a Monday or a Tuesday. And I was at Annunciation, and I was doing the 9th Mass, and I forgot the words of consecration. I like lifted up the bread and wine and, threw him with him, and then the organist was like looking at me, and it's like, wait, did I mess something? Oh yeah, I didn't change the bread and wine into Jesus. So we put the bread and wine down, and we went back and started over and consecrated the bread and wine, right? But that's not, there's a certain number of Masses for a reason, right? Now, when I think about this situation, again, looking not at our own parish or my assignment in particular, but the one in general, this is going on across the country, just like it was in the first reading. And one thing I hear, sometimes it's kind of split up as like priests or the laity blaming each other. So the ladies sometimes like, well, priests just work harder, suck it up, it's not that bad. And it's not. It's not hitting railroad ties, it's not welding. But there are things that ought to be done that are sometimes being neglected. On my day off, I go out to my parents and I cut down trees and split wood. That's what I do for fun. I like work. It's not a work thing. It's not an energy thing. It's not that thing. It's just that it takes a different type of energy to say Mass and hear confessions and do those sorts of things. To be in front of hundreds of people 5 or 6 times in a row, it's hard to do what really is supposed to be done. Sometimes people say, hey, well, why don't we get retired priests or religious priests, monks, come in and say Mass? Well, first of all, the important part about retired priests is that first word, retired. I'll give you their numbers, and if you can talk them out of retirement, I'll give you a bonus, whatever you want. I'll take you out to dinner, right? They're retired. Now, they do amazing work. Our retired priests, who are all in their, late 70s and 80s, they're going around and filling in for guys, letting guys get vacations and that kind of thing all the time. They're doing great work and amazing work. I hope I have their energy when I'm 80. The other thing with the religious priests, right? Well, hey, there's monks down at St. Meinrad, or there's, monks down in Columbus, or there's monks, over in this part or that place, or the monks at St. Meinrad have been covering the Tell City Deanery for many years, right? Lots of parishes down there that monks of St. Meinrad go out and are the priests for and pastors for. But they're pulling back, and rightly so, because you don't join a monastery to become a pastor. It's a different type of work, and it's a very dignified calling. The focus, sometimes, I remember my aunt one time telling me, like, I go down to St. Meinrad and I see 19 priests celebrating Mass on Sunday, and I think, what a waste. And I always think, well, the number one thing is not to have as many Masses celebrated in an archdiocese as humanly possible. That's not the number one priority. The number one priority is the preaching and spreading of the good news and making Christ present, right? And so these monks that are in different religious orders have made a vow to say, we're going to pray, we're going to live our life in poverty, serving the poor. There's different ministries besides diocesan priesthood. And some of them, again, have been doing tremendous work helping fill in, right? The other thing, though, is that sometimes, you hear it from priests saying, well, only 22% of you are going to Mass every Sunday. That's the number now, right? Or you go get your friends and bring them here. That's why it's the problem, right? This is back and forth that doesn't do any good. In the early church, in the first reading, they didn't blame each other. They didn't say, well, it's your fault, or no, it's your fault. They said, hey, here's the situation. What are we going to do? And I think about it from the perspective, I was thinking about this sort of imaginary conversation that might take place, right? Imagining one of those widows, we'll call her Constance. If you think about it, up to this point in the first reading, for the entire history of the Catholic Church up to that point, Constance had been visited by an apostle. That's pretty awesome, right? a weekly check-in or monthly, or who knows exactly how much it was, but they were being visited by the apostles. And they got to the point where they were like, that's can't do that anymore. That's not, the workload is all good. It's all good stuff. We can't keep doing that. Now imagine the first time, this is what is kind of humorous, I think, in some ways. Imagine the first time that Stephen came to visit Constance, Deacon Stephen. Constance is like, who are you? I'm Deacon Stephen, ma'am. I'm here to visit and bring communion or check in on you. Constance is like, well, where's Peter? Peter's always visited me, and he's an apostle. And who are you? Well, ma'am, they decided to ordain us deacons, and I'm a deacon. What's a deacon? I want Peter. Peter's always visited me. For the entire history of Catholicism, it was Peter. And Stephen's probably like, well, I'm sorry. I'm not Peter, right? He's the Pope, and things are expanding, things are growing, and he's got other things, and so they've asked me to come. And there's a temptation, understandably, for Constance or anybody to say, well, to look back and be like, well, that was awesome when the Pope visited me. And surely it was. Understandably. That'd be great. And that's not happening anymore. Right? That's not happening. But that doesn't mean that the church is being defeated. It's change. Right? The ways in which things are done change. And that's okay. Right? We can so often, nostalgia and longing for the past, and if Constance threw a fit and was just like, well, you tell them I'm not part of this anymore until Peter comes back. Do that. But the church didn't do that. The church continued to grow. The church found ways to meet the needs of good things. Looking at all of this, it's really important to say too, I'm not saying that our parishes are changing in relation to the Archdiocese. Our parishes are safe. Whatever happens in the midst of all of these discussions and change that's taking place, about 108 masses maybe being too many, and those kinds of things, this is the only parish in Putnam County. And Annunciation is the only parish in Clay County. That's not going to change. That's why the diocese said you can go ahead and expand. While we're looking at other places, Annunciation, you can go ahead and rehab your church and keep it from falling down. Because you're the only parishes in your county. And I think it's also really important to say too, that this is not, hey, you guys need to do more work or volunteer more. That's not it either. This parish, and the same with Annunciation, has tremendous numbers of people volunteering, bringing communion to the sick and shut-ins, serving the poor, doing prison ministry, helping out on commissions, teaching our children, doing all of these things. I want to affirm that loudly and very clearly. This is not, hey, I'm trying to do it all. Where is everyone? No, I am amazed and blown away and humbled all the time by the work that both parishes are doing. One of the things that spiritual director was helping me with is saying, maybe, and so a little bit, this conversation came out of budgeting for the year. And so both parishes are doing a little bit to provide a little bit more structure and assistance to the different ministries. And so here that will look like we're getting somebody to do some business manager work to help out with that aspect of things. The budget's still balanced. Okay, the budget's still balanced. And this is not a homily about any of that sort of thing. I think it's just important. What I want to end with is just thinking about change. Thinking about change. People say all the time, it's like there's a real fear of change. Change is hard. Change is hard. Right? But they didn't go into it in that first reading. They didn't say, and this is what so often is a temptation in this discussion, whether it's at the diocesan level or at the parish level. You notice that nobody went into that discussion in the first reading saying, this is the problem and I know the answer, and if it's not my answer that you guys choose, I'm leaving. If you don't fix I hear that in these discussions sometimes, right? Okay, yes, here's the problem, but I myself know the answer, and it needs to be this, and if it's not, I'm out. That's not Catholicism. That's not the church. It said they all got together and they said there's a problem. Some of the things aren't getting done. Now, what are we going to do? There was this belief that we all carry a piece of the truth. We all see different perspectives, and that we bring that to the table and we say, okay, given all of these things, now what are we all going to do about it? We have to fight the temptation to say, I know the problem, and here's the solution, and you better choose this one. That's a very tempting thing to say if that's the sin of pride. There was this radical belief in the early church that we can all figure this out if we get together. And that's what hopefully is happening at the archdiocesan level. And hopefully happening at our parish as well. But to be open to change is hard. One of my favorite blessed John Henry Newman said a quote that I always think about. He says, "To live is to change." To live is to change. And he said to be perfect, to be a saint, is to change often. Nostalgia, longing for the past, longing for how it used to be, or saying, well, Peter used to visit me, that kills the faith. Yes, I know, that would be great if Pope Francis took 11 a.m. Mass or visited you at your home, but it ain't happening. Change happens. And if we're open to that, it will call us to growth. Being open to change is what it means to be alive, and that's the beautiful line that we hear in the second reading today. We are called to be living stones, to build up this church, it says, St. Peter. Living stones, not dead stones. Dead stones don't change. Nothing happens, no movement, no life, no breath. Everything stays the same because it's dead. St. Peter says we're called to be living stones, and part of that means change. And being open to it and knowing that in changing it doesn't mean things are dying. Although there's always the temptation to see it that way. We pray for the strength to be people, to be a community, to be an archdiocese, to be a church that is open and recognizes the call to be living stones. To recognize that sometimes things change, but that the church continues to beat, its heart beats. We continue to be the presence of Christ in our community, and that despite the hardness and the difficulty involved with change, that it is always part of being alive, and it is part of being of faith. We pray that we may always trust in Christ, who says in the gospel today that He is the way, the truth, and the life. May we trust that and follow Him in all things.